Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of That Early Childhood Nerd. I'm Heather Burnt-Santy, thrilled to have with me today Miriam Beloglovsky. Hi, Miriam.
Hi, Heather. How are you?
Good. Thank you. Thank you for being here. I know a lot of people listening will say, oh, yes, the Loose Parts books. I know Miriam, or, your blog posts. But just in case folks aren't familiar with you, what do you want them to know?
Well, I think one of the important things about me is that I was actually born and raised in Mexico. So people listen to my last name and they're connected to Russia or Poland. It
Yeah.
is my grandparents were Russian and immigrated during the Bolshevik Revolution, ended up in Mexico. So it's for me right now, it's been a very interesting passage when I'm seeing all of what's happening with the immigrant population that has not been able to come into this country. And I remember my grandparents, and that's what happened to them back then. They couldn't get a visa, so they ended up in Mexico. So that has been a lot of what has guided a lot of who I am today. This idea of really finding ways to support and to connect and to give others, because it's been a challenge. Fortunately, they did very well in Mexico, and I was raised in a very privileged environment, which is another part of me that a lot of people may not know.
Yeah.
I am the co-author of the books, the Loose Parts book. I just released a new one on loose parts for children with diverse abilities, which is something that I am really diving into it more and more, how to bring inclusion and equity.
Yeah.
In
Is that book out yet, or is that
it
coming?
is. It came
Oh, I
out
don't
this
have that
year.
one yet.
Oh, I gotta send you a copy. So I can make sure you give me your address.
Okay.
I'll
But
have to send you
I
a
use
copy.
another one of your books in one of the classes I teach. I use the Early Learning Theories
Early
Made
learning.
Visible book,
Yes. What
which
do you
is
think? It's
um
such
I
a good book.
I really like the book. My students really connect with it because I think of the real world connections. It's not just here's what somebody thought, but what I also love is you've got, it's not just the four main dead white guys. So many theory sections of textbooks talk about, and then they throw in Maria Montessori for good measure. But you've got Louise Durbin Sparks in there, and I think that's important. Yeah. So actually, when I used it so I've had the book for a long time and have used it for a while. And when I finished using it to teach last spring, as we were going through the semester, I was like, oh, this all seems really more surface level remembered. And the students were like, what are you talking about? This is an amazing book. And I was like, I just need to read it again with, not teaching eyes. Like, I don't know. I just felt like I've used it so long, it's become sort of ingrained.
Right.
And the students came in and they were like, remember, this is amazing.
Yeah, I think we simplified it. We tried. I mean, I
Yeah.
got to tell you, when we wrote that book, I personally delved really deeply into understanding the theory. So I looked for old manuscripts.
Uh-huh.
I read all of Howard Gardner's books, which I
Wow.
don't got to the original work. It's very dense and
Yeah.
very complex.
I've never made it through a Howard Gardner book because of
Yeah, well,
because it is it's dense reading. Yeah.
so
Um,
the nice thing is, how do you bring it down so that
yeah.
students can relate to it, and the stories that were woven into it are really.
Yeah. So now I feel like I said something that was really offensive when I said I was looking at it too familiarly. Too familiarly. I don't mean. I feel like I insulted your book.
No,
That
actually,
was
I
not
felt
the
like
intention.
that to me was a compliment,
Okay.
because that was what we wanted. Actually,
Yeah.
that book was a longer.
Yeah.
We got half of it out.
Okay. Yeah. I think it just goes right. It shares all that information
Mm-hmm.
and then, yeah, connects it right away to what does
And
this
that's what
mean in
we
our
were
work with
looking.
children? Yeah.
So I'm honored that you said that,
Yeah.
because
Okay.
that we accomplished what we looked to accomplish. It was not
Okay.
an
Good.
easy book to
Good.
write. I would love to write another similar book, but include other theories.
Hmm.
I would like to do more Jerome Bruner, more of the sociocultural
Yeah.
work,
Yeah.
go more into Gloria Ladson Billings, more of that, really work on equity and
Hmm.
anti-racism.
Hmm.
That would be something that maybe
Yeah.
in another life I can do.
Okay. I was going to say, I'll be waiting for that one too, but
Oh, so much right now.
you probably have a lot of projects going. Anyway, Miriam, we're going to talk about play as an equity issue. And so because we have a quote to start all our conversations, I've got one that comes from an article that you wrote with Michelle Grant Groves, and was published in Exchange Magazine in June 2019. Promoting Equity Through Play is the name of the article. And here's the quote that I think is a good starting point for this. Looking at the ever-present push for traditional academics and the long-standing narrative regarding underserved students who need to be quote-unquote readied for kindergarten, play is now actively marginalized by an educational system that denies equal access and opportunity to play, all too often falling along racially segregated lines, as well as the class and language statuses of the children they serve. So let me start by just saying, what do you mean by equity? Like, let's define a term before we go further in this.
Yeah, and I think that's always something that comes, a question that emerges all the time. You know, we define equality and then we define equity, and we think we're doing equality by giving everybody the same, but in reality, the parameters are not changing. You know, the things just move up, but the inequities continue to exist. So the way that in this article we're talking about equity is more about how when children are pushed to do more academic work, the whole idea of play is going out the window. You know, they're not giving them the opportunities to continue to play because we are remedying them. You know, in the article, we talk about readying children for the next life. And unfortunately, it comes from this idea that children from underserved communities are coming in with less than everybody else. Yes, maybe they have had less opportunities, but that doesn't mean they would not benefit from a really robust and rich environment where play is the main source of learning. And I'm not talking about, okay, you're going to get me into this very difficult point. We are not going to talk about play-based learning because that has also become this adult control.
Yes.
Based.
Agreed. That's not going to get you into a lot of trouble here.
Well, not with you, but maybe with other people.
Yeah.
So I never talk about play-based. I talk about play for the sake of play.
Yeah.
And when we remove play from children's lives, we're really creating an inequity. Because play is really these opportunities, like this liberation, this freedom that children can engage with, that can give them what they need in the future. And we're not seeing that. And that's where I call play as equity, where we're missing the point, you know, where we don't spend time in these playfulness moments. We're not creating playful cultures. We're not creating spaces where children can just play, because we have such a push to constantly ready them. So that's how we define equity within that context. And unfortunately, it happens mostly in underfunded communities.
Yeah, there is this idea, and I think this has come up in a couple of conversations that I've recorded lately, that if a student is, or a child is from you know, a lower income family or community, or, you know, is Black or Latino, Latinx, sorry, that automatically puts them at risk. And so that must mean that they need the more formal school stuff earlier. And it's fine if we let these other kids play, because they don't, you know, they're fine already. They're going to be fine. But this community that we've identified and labeled needs something more. And that, I think that's dangerous. It's so dangerous. And also it leads to a lot of wasted time and money.
It is dangerous. And it's also a very inequitable process, because we're sort of highlighting these communities, but we're not giving the community what they're asking for. We're not taking the time to talk to them. You know, we're just bringing in systems and systems and systems that are not making changes for them. On the contrary, we're using them to sort of push agendas that are very politicized, that are very socialized, and I'm not talking about socialism, I'm talking about social, cultural perspectives, people that want to accomplish certain things to demonstrate something that has to happen. And we're doing it at the expense of children in these communities. And that's wrong. That is absolutely wrong. And it is dangerous because we're creating a new generation that may not be able to really accomplish their success. And that's where the system of oppressions come in. We really somehow continue to oppress the same populations over and over again. Yeah. And if we don't do it in one way, we do it in another. Before it was the high schoolers and they're not making it, and now it's the young children, they're not making it, so we got to fix them.
Yeah, right. They're not making it, so they get a greater burden rather than me as the trained adult wondering, what maybe do I need to shift around, or what maybe do I need to change about myself? What biases am I bringing to this process or conversation? It's kindergarten readiness, school readiness in general is just, I can hardly hear the phrase anymore without a physical reaction, because it's so disrespectful, and I'll say harmful in the impact it's had on children under 5 and the programs that they're in, and the ones who are in school. But I hadn't ever thought about how it's really intended to be normative. I mean, I know that, like, we want to have these standardized children so that they can be successful by whatever we've decided is successful. But those standards are white standards.
Right.
Those standards are middle and upper class white standards that we have said, this is what it looks like when you're ready. You will look like a child from a different whole set of circumstances, instead of saying, what do we need to know about all these humans who are involved in all these processes?
And I think that's what I was talking about, the equality.
Yeah.
We want the standards, so we want to be everybody equal. But then we don't realize, if we look at equity here and inequality there, and this is something I learned from Michelle, is that you can continue to bring equality and funding and standardization and everything, but the children will always, the gap is never going to close. The gap will always remain the same, because we're not looking at how to change the way we do what we do. We just think, let's standardize them all, let's push these children, give them academics, and at the expense of play. And we're saying, well, these children can play, like you said before, but these children cannot. And those are the issues of equity and inequality that need to change.
So what should we be doing? What are
That's a great question.
Things?
I think the first thing we need to do is, we as a profession need to really come to terms and understandings of what we talk about. Because I think we have so many different perspectives on what play means.
Right.
Very
frustrating on social media.
I mean, it drives me insane. And this new emergence of play-based is like, why? Yeah. Why are we calling it play-based learning when in reality, play is play? Let's just call it play. But even those of us who support play, we're not even in agreement, because we all have a different perspective of what play means. So that's another issue of equity. I think one of my biggest push is to begin to talk about play from an equity lens, so that we get away from these play-based and no, children just need to do this, and what do we call it? Unsupervised, or let them be, or forced. That's the other piece we talked about in the article, is if we really look at play from an equity lens and an inclusion lens, maybe we can get somewhere. Maybe really we can start wrapping our heads around something more robust that can help us really begin to engage in a deeper conversation.
Yeah.
I think we need to create, and I was talking to Maurice Sykes about creating a council that really looks at play, like they did when they did the Neurons to Neighborhood.
Yeah.
Something that really brings in the research, because that's another thing that I think it's lacking. We do have a lot of research around play, but we don't really have a lot of research that really looks at these really deep perspectives on equity and play. So,
and I think from my own research and writing projects, whenever I try to look for, good solid research about play, it's old, right? A lot of it is old. And I think that's part of the problem, is that a lot of times, well, for one thing, we all know that like research done at a university level is very limited in the audience they have for participant, or they limit the audience for participant by their research parameters. It's going to be white children whose parents can bring them, and higher income families, higher educated parents. So that automatically pulls some of the results into a little bit of question. But if I think play, just play for the sake of play, is harder to get that research funding and all that, the institutional backing, because it's fallen so much, even in our own profession. It's held in such slight regard that it's hard to get new current research.
Yeah. And that's I think one of the biggest problems. I think creating a council where we can have these conversations would be the beginning. Where can we really bring in an interdisciplinary approach where we have sociology, psychology, early childhood educators, child development specialists, people that come together and really begin to talk about what does it really mean? What does it look like? And how do we begin to apply it? Because I think in many ways, when we just say, oh, play for the sake of play, that's what's gotten us into trouble as well, because it doesn't mean anything to other people. They don't understand it. I'm not saying it's wrong or that we need to stop saying it. We just need to find a different way of communicating what we mean. And that's been the challenge that I have noticed. I mean, even if you just look at loose parts, we didn't coin the term. We know that.
Right.
It's a theory that already was there. It was coined by an architect. But we gave context to a lot of it. I mean, 5 books. Right. It's pretty profound. It's like robust data that we did.
Yeah.
And look what happened. People started joining the University of Social Media and completely deconstructed the theory. And what you see, I mean, like you said, you cringe when you hear readiness. I do too. I cringe when I go and see all of these loose parts groups.
Yeah. I just had to leave a Facebook group because it was supposed to, it was supposed to be a loose parts, but it was not. It was a pretty photo op group, not necessarily.
Yeah. Well,
what I look for when I look for loose parts stuff.
And it is about, do you do this with this? So the loose parts have become a way to do another Ditto sheet, to do another worksheet, to do another lesson. I just saw one on teaching infants and toddlers about snow in a warm weather country.
Using loose parts.
Using foam, styrofoam to build snow people. So how do you fight that? How do you fight that? And you teach college. I just retired from teaching college, and that's our challenge.
It is. It's very hard. Yeah. Though the hopeful thing for me is, I feel like as hard as it is to, a lot of my students are already doing the work. They've already been working in childcare centers or preschools, or, they have their family childcare home, and then they come to get the degree that the licensing or whoever tells them that they need to get to stay in business or to keep their job, or to, sort of elevate themselves professionally. And so they come in with some already sort of established habits, and a lot of it is very schoolification focused. And even those folks, it's so hard for them to think about doing it another way, but they talk about play as if that's what feels right to them. They just don't know how to do it or how to convince others that it's okay to do it. And that's my students in those conversations are talking about their early childhood colleagues. They're not talking about convincing families or legislators or policymakers. They're just talking about trying to convince their coworker to allow more play into the program. And I think it's really so hard.
It is hard. I just finished writing a book called Just Play. And it's for adults.
Oh, great.
It's how to infuse play into your family nights, how to infuse professional development, play opportunities. So really changing the way that we look at the whole picture, including conferences.
Yeah.
How to make conferences more playful. I mean, I honestly get very bored when I get to conferences. Yeah. It's a few people maybe that I enjoy listening to. The rest of my time I spend networking, because I am like, I can't hear another talking person. So anyways, so I think the more we give adults opportunities to play, I think we begin to make more changes into what we're doing. That's what's happening with your students. Yeah. I saw it with my own students. I had in one of the groups that I was working with, one woman at the end just couldn't stop sobbing. It says, I've never played in my life.
Oh, yeah.
And, it's so sad that there's another issue of equity, people that come from communities where they have had to work so hard their entire life. And finally, they have a moment where they can actually sit and play.
So how can we navigate that? Because then that's my privilege. I've come across this when so I used to work for a speech language department at another college at Purdue University. And every semester we had a new group of grad students to do orientation with. And I always would just try to have a time where we were sitting around telling our stories of play from childhood before I introduced to them how our curriculum in the preschool was going to look very different than what they maybe were expecting. We'd spend a lot of time just trying to talk about it ourselves. And there were folks who just didn't have that that memory. And so I stopped, or I tweaked that a little bit, but that, I guess, I don't know if that's a question. That's an element of my privilege that I hadn't considered.
Yeah. I mean, I noticed that too. And what I've done personally is I always have play in all of my sessions. Whenever I do present, I travel with a lot of suitcases.
Yeah.
Loose parts. I mean, I have loose parts coming everywhere. So, I let them play first before I ask the question, because sometimes when we ask the question about your memories of play, they can be very triggering.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the other piece that I
very deep emotion.
Had to sort of realize. Yeah.
Right. So I give them the opportunity to first play and then begin to make the connections. And then I'll throw in the question, halfway through, when they have already spent a lot of time playing. I think we have not done a good job in connecting the idea of play to what it really means in the academics that are achieved. Because I also know that we have sent this message to families, and I work with a lot of families in Los Angeles, in Pacoima, where they come in. A lot of them is first time that they've been in this country. A lot of them come undocumented. A lot of them it's a transition community, but a very solid community at the same time. And they may not have the time to really talk about what they have done. They're in survival mode. They don't want their children to not have more than they did. And for them, because the message that they have gotten, I mean, here in California, we have First Five. The message was read to your child. Well, you have families that don't know how to read, but the message means if they know how to read, they'll succeed, because that's what we've been saying for so long. We don't talk about, let them play and develop their intellectual learning. we don't play, and we don't talk about play and how it connects to their creativity. You don't hear that in any of the advertising, in any of what the parents are getting.
Mm-hmm.
So they come in and they want their children to be successful. So what they know is ABCs and 1, 2, 3s.
Mm-hmm.
So the job that we need to do as a profession is do both. To begin to talk about, yes, this is important, and the many other ways that they can get there,
Mm-hmm.
and at the same time acquire more.
Yeah. I think we really, as a field, as a profession, mishandled the neuroscience about those first years. And the message very much became, you better push those academics now or it's going to be too late. Instead of, the real message of those connections are being made. Here's how they're made. And it's a more rapid time of connection than in other points in their life. But it's not about letters, numbers.
No. And then we
discreetly.
say they're traumatized.
Yeah.
So now we put a label on them.
Yeah.
That's why the increase of children that have been diagnosed.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not saying that may not be true, but I also think that there's a large number of children that have just been diagnosed because we don't know what else to do.
Right. And I think that then takes away from the children who really genuinely do need the support for having, ADHD or for being autistic or whatever that might be. When we overly generalize or we overly, I don't know. I don't know. When we don't see that for what it is, that sometimes it's the environment that's impacting, sometimes it's their experiences that are impacting behavior. And it's a disservice then to those
who do need
it. Yes. Yeah.
My point is that we don't know how to behave as educators, as adults, unless we have a label to fix.
Yeah.
And I think that is the saddest thing that has happened in our profession.
Yeah.
I mean, I look at all this readiness movement, and it started with, the Perry program, the Ypsilanti, Michigan program. And that was 40 years ago?
Yeah.
It was a small group. Yes, it was a fabulous research process that they did. It emerged with all of these curriculum, but they were putting a lot of money.
Yeah.
So now we're taking that idea and trying to replicate it, but we're not putting the funding.
Yeah.
So that's another inequity that has happened.
Yeah. Or it just gets low. And we talked about the Perry Preschool Project a few episodes ago because Louise Duerman Sparks wrote an article that was like, here's what really was happening. The Bank Street curriculum didn't even exist at the time that we were doing the Perry Preschool. But we say, we have this study that says high quality early childhood leads to these good results. And we just stop there and we don't say, okay, so what specifically were they doing in that program? Well, they were including families. They were doing home visits. There was a feeling of community and, teachers who had time to reflect and plan and use that true emerging kind of curriculum.
Right. And now we have, the high scope that came.
Yeah.
As a result of that.
Yeah.
But it was also the funding.
Yeah, right. Absolutely. Yeah.
And we can't compare that to what is happening today. It's an inequity all around. Doesn't matter which way we look at it, what is happening in early childhood today, it's really sad.
Yeah.
Sometimes I'm keep thinking, do I still want to do this? And honestly, yes, because it's my passion. I come from the entertainment industry. I had an executive job that I left to do this work and never looked back. That was 30 some years ago. And my hope is that one day maybe I'll do a documentary or something to tie it together. But
there you go.
I love this work, and I think we need to do something to change the reality. Social media has been a problem.
Mm-hmm.
It has created tremendous disconnect into what is real theory. And it upsets me that the people that run these social media groups have not taken the responsibility to really look at what it is. That's why I really admire Susanne Axelson, because she is consistent in her message and she challenges people's thinking. I wish I had time to do that.
Right.
I just don't.
Yeah, I'm just at the end of her original learning book. Like I just have, I think, one chapter left, and it's
fabulous.
Great. Yeah.
I reviewed the book for her.
Oh, so a while ago you were talking about. Can we go back to this idea of a council?
Yes,
for play?
absolutely.
Because I have two things about that. The first, though, is I just want to bring back a couple episodes ago, I had Josh Thompson and Vivian Genieser. Is that how she says her name? I've forgotten already. Who I met at the IPA conference in Texas when I met you in person finally. And so they came on and they were talking about the Scholarly Snapshots book that they did that and I can't remember if you contributed to one of the essays to that. But it's a collection of 16 essays essentially, and each one is a different theory of play, but they're from all different disciplines. It's not all just early childhood people or just child development people. So I want to plug that again while we're talking about it. But so how achievable is that? And what would a council like that look like? What do we do? I want to do it. I'm in.
I think it would have to be, I don't want to say selective, but I think there has to be a level of selectivity around it.
Yeah.
I don't know if you listened to the Essence of Play Summit that I did this last November. I had Rasul Mowad, who's a professor in Parks and Recs. And he brought such a different perspective and understanding of what we need to be doing, because he was looking more at the geographies where children come from. So we started talking about this idea of play and how in many communities, I grew up like that, where the parents would sit in the porch and we would run around and they would keep track of us somehow. My children grew up like that, and that is not happening because we're not respecting it anymore. So I think you need to bring urban planning, people with urban planning experiences, people with design experience, architects. We need to bring in sociologists. We need to bring psychologists and really begin to, the way that I would start, I really would love to put this council together, is to start looking for the research and what resonates. Like I already know that Rasul would be the person that I would bring in.
Yeah.
Because I know he would bring a different perspective. He talked a lot about the favelas during the Olympics in Brazil, how people were displaced. And then he talked in his book, he talks about himself growing up and how the country club left the area that he lived in and left a lot of emptiness in the space because of white people left. So, and I read articles on parks. They started doing them as a way to keep the community, the Black communities out of every place else. And then the white community started crying that, why don't we have the same wonderful parks they have? So we need to talk about that. We need to talk about where is there access for play. We want to say, children will play anywhere, but access to play is crucial. I worked in a community where there were 13 active gangs in a 1.5 mile radius in a port of entry community in Los Angeles. 4:00, there was nobody outside.
Yeah. Oh boy.
Play was gone. And what we started finding is children were entering kindergarten. They had vision issues because they were watching so much TV, so their eyes fixated, and they were having a hard time reconnecting them and refocusing them. 75% of the children we tested with vision problems. So then you need to bring in the medical community as well. You need to bring in the business community. The problem right now is that education is isolated. We have isolated education. And then we have all of these other satellite companies that try to feed into the money that comes into education. So every time there's money that comes in, it goes to the same place. It's happening here in California.
Yeah.
With this TK movement that emerged. When it started, I raised my hand in the middle of a hearing and I said, that sounds wonderful for educators and for administrators. Where are the children in this equation?
Right.
They banned me. They didn't talk to me after that.
Well, good for you for raising the question. I mean, that seems so basic, but that's, I think, where a lot of my struggle comes from is so much of what we say we're doing because we value children or we want the best for children is really what's best for the adults.
Yeah.
And the children are often the last to be taken into consideration, if they're taken into consideration at all. Or they're, it's such a deficit model to view them through.
I keep going to the play as equity.
Yeah.
We see play as from an equity lens. We can ask those questions.
Uh-huh.
How is that better for the child? How is having TK going to help this child? Mm-hmm. How will the practices? And they try to convince me that they were doing what I was talking about. And I said, I never saw it, because the money is going to people that don't get it.
Uh-huh.
So so then you ask, how is this equitable in the way that it's being funded? What is taken away? It's not an easy battle, but I think if we could have more people talking about it from a different angle, we could grow it.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm a firm believer of that.
Yeah.
We could make a difference.
I have to believe that, right? We don't make enough money to do this for and not believe in it to continue to put this work and the sometimes heartache that goes in. And I don't mean, I don't mean that in the all teachers are heroes narrative that is also sort of damaging, but so a lot of our listeners are, folks who are in a childcare classroom, in a preschool classroom, working for Head Start, doing that direct frontline care and teaching stuff. Where do they fit? Do we have any easy steps or how do you see them fitting?
I think they're a strong voice. Mm-hmm. I think they're just not being heard. Mm-hmm. If I would do it all over again, all the 30 years that I used to do teaching, I would help them learn to read the myth, because we have so many things that have myths in our profession. Licensing says, no, we can't, so we can risk. That's where I do more of now. I really talk about what does it say in licensing, because it's become sort of something that has been pushed on them. So if we could empower them to really read, and I know that is hard because they're tired and they're not getting paid a lot, but I think if we could help them and support them in really understanding that a lot of what has happened has been mystified and it's not reality, I think they would be more willing to speak up. It takes courage.
That's right. That's a great idea. And I think a lot of people who do want to speak up more feel like they're not confident enough to articulate against an administrator or a parent. But what you're describing is becoming articulate in that, like really understanding what the reality is, so that when you try to talk, it's not just, it's not just Heather's opinion. It's not just what somebody likes and prefers. Here's what licensing really says.
Yeah, you know what? I'm not as worried about the people that are in the trenches, because I think they will do it.
Yeah.
I think what we need to tackle is the people above, the in-between.
Okay.
Not the policy makers, but more of the administrative groups. Because they're the ones that push a lot of these agendas. When I saw in all of the public policy work that I've done, that's what I saw. It's somebody in a Department of Ed or the county office of Ed has an agenda, and it's mostly personal agenda, and they see money coming.
Yep.
It's when it begins to be then they keep that discourse.
Yeah.
So of course, how do you get what you want? You silence the people that are doing it.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm more worried about that. It's like, how do we change, or how do we get them out of the way?
Yeah.
Here's somebody that works in the Department of Ed said to me once, when I was having this type of conversation with him, and this person said, well, there's only so much innovation you have in education.
What?
And I thought, if we in education cannot be innovative,
Oh my. Yeah.
that's the explanation of why these big bureaucracies have been built.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why we keep rehashing and repeating the same thing.
Yeah.
So I don't think it's an easy thing, but I think where to start is we, you, me, all of us who speak on play, we need to come to the table and say, yes, we need to talk about play for the sake of play, but we need to also define it. We need to explain it. We cannot just have people just play and say, let just children play. We need to talk about what are they gaining when they're playing, because what we're fighting is doing that. We're not doing it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think families too are key, because what you described when you were talking about working with the families in the transition community you were describing was parents who were advocating for their children with the best information that they had, and they're inundated before they are parents, before they have children in their lives to worry about in this way, with messages that earlier is better, academics is it, play is a waste of time unless it has letters on it, unless your toy has letters or numbers on it. And if we could help them become more comfortable with the value of play, then we could achieve that goal of play for play's sake for the children. I dream of the day when parents are calling childcare centers and saying, tell me how much time children get to really play in your program, and not what do you do to get them ready for school. But they call and they say, how many ways can my child play at your program?
But then here is the inequity.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the parents that I'm talking about are parents that have no money, that they live in very underfunded communities. Right. They are living day to day, paycheck to paycheck. Not even paycheck to, mostly our daily jobs that they do. So they expect the schools to do that work.
Oh, and sure. That makes sense.
Schools are only doing what the schools think that they want to do to get the funding that they need. It's all money.
Yeah.
And then we have families in the upper class communities who are also pushing their children to all of these organized sports.
Oh, yeah.
Because, they don't learn through play. They learn through doing that.
Mm-hmm.
So to have parents to call the schools, those would be the parents that have the money because they have a choice of where to go.
Oh, sure. Well, yeah. So, that was my privilege showing again. I guess that was coming from my context as a former childcare center director, where people were looking for childcare, not necessarily to enroll in public school or private school or something like that. But
yeah,
yes, you're right that parents have varied experiences too. That can't all be lumped into one, and I just tried to lump them all into one.
But it's okay. This is all a process that we're growing through. Here we are, two white women talking about it. Know, maybe I can because I grew up in Mexico, but I'm still a white woman. Green-eyed white woman that I can get anywhere and achieve anything that I want because I've been given that privilege. The question is, how do we shift that? Again, the lens of play equity or play as equity. How do we shift it so that we begin to understand that equity starts when we give children opportunities to really engage in this powerful, liberating way of being in the world. And that's our job. That's what we need to be doing as early childhood educators, especially those of us who have gotten to the point where we have a little bit of influence out there. We need to start talking about this in a more robust way, and we're not, Heather, because we're too busy saying, oh, play is play. You know, I mean, I love Dan Hutchins. May he rest in peace.
Yes.
He's a dear friend.
Yes.
But there were moments when he would drive me crazy.
Oh, Dan and I definitely had that conversation, because he would say, why does it have to be about learning? And I would say, because children learn from everything. Like, there's always an impact. But yeah, definitely he was one of those.
So see, when we are not getting together as a profession, and I'm not saying stop playing, I'm saying codify it, give it a name, show why it is important. You know, we're trying to battle practices, but we don't present another perspective. We just say, well, just let them play. You know, they have standards that they have to meet. The parents have bought into it. The educators have to do it. Now we need to be able to give them the tools. And if we don't, we're not going to get anywhere.
Right. I would love to live in a world, maybe that's the third or fourth time I've used that phrase this episode, but I would love to live in a world where nobody questioned and children just played because they were children, and that's their state and their biological drive and their right. But the reality is we have people to persuade. And whenever you have to persuade someone, you have to think in their terms. So if it's a money argument, you've got to figure that out. And if it's a philosophy argument, you've got to figure that out.
And it's not that you're selling to it.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's on the contrary. I think you're learning to manipulate it. You know, that's how I see things.
Sure, but I think it's an authentic, like, we're not.
Absolutely.
I think the arguments to be made for play in those different contexts are authentic.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it is manipulating to your audience and
not manipulating the people, is manipulating the system so that you can understand where they're coming from and be able to get your message across.
Yeah.
Wasn't Marshall McLuhan who said the messages in the
Medium? Was that her?
Yeah, the Medium.
Is that what we're talking about? Yeah.
The messages in the Medium. So we know the medium, we know the context. We need to start talking that context. You know, that's one of the things I think Suzanne Axelson has done so beautifully in her book. She really is able to articulate it in a way that makes sense, and people will probably start buying it. You know, with the Loose Parts book, I think they have these profound research behind it, and there were a lot of work to do. But then, unfortunately, it was just taken and bastardized in different ways, because it's easy. You know, I can take this and put it here. Oh, Loose Parts. Look, I'm being really, I don't want to use that word, but I guess very trendy.
Yes. Yeah. I usually have a real aversion to anything that sounds like just a new buzzword. But Loose Parts got me right away. Like, once I really started looking at it, and
there's theory behind it.
Yeah, exactly.
You just need to understand it. And here's the other thing about equity that I'm going to bring in.
Yes, please.
That we also talk in the article is, if you notice, most of our really systems that we follow, they're all foreign systems.
Whether what systems?
Foreign. They come from the country. You know, we all of a sudden are all Reggio inspired.
Yeah.
And many people don't even know what it means, you know. So that is in many ways another issue of equity, because that Reggio inspired or Reggio philosophy or pedagogy has not been implemented in communities that could really benefit from it. And how do you translate what happens in Reggio Emilia, Italy, into a classroom in this community I was talking about? How would the children be able to connect with it? How do you translate it? We don't take the time to do that. Maria Montessori, it became a commercialized jargon. You know, we sell it. This is how rich, wealthy parents can go and buy into a Montessori program. My friend Norman is going to be killing me after he listens to this. Angie Play, I love.
Me too.
What they're doing. It's wonderful. I have had profound conversations with Jesse, and they're being more cautious about how they're translating into this country.
Yeah, I think so. Jesse's been on the show several times, and I think he and Christina Tapia both are very conscientious about respecting what Anji really is, and what our culture really is, and how it can and doesn't fit. But I think some of
it too.
Oh yeah. Good. Yeah, like this is a whole other episode. Never mind. I was gonna say the Reggio and all the labels work to sort of be gatekeeping too within the field, and it divides us more than it unites us. And
I agree. And again, the equity.
Yes, yeah, for sure. Well, here we are in an hour, Miriam.
I could go on.
Yeah. Well,
your listeners won't listen so long.
We'll plan a part 2 sometime, and you can come back after I get the new Loose Parts book and read it. We can.
I would love to have that conversation with you and Mike.
Yeah,
the 3 of us.
Yeah, that sounds great. I'll volunteer him right here on the air, so everyone expects him.
Mike, you're invited.
He I think obviously has to be in on that conversation. So this has been really great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And I really enjoyed having you on. Your books are available everywhere, right?
Everywhere.
Do you have a website?
I do. It's Playful Transformation.
That's right. Yes. Okay.
If you Google it, it'll come up.
They'll find you.
I trademarked the name, so now it's registered for the first time. After the course I learned.
Good. Yeah. Okay. Well, I know people are going to enjoy this episode. So again, I'll just thank you. And then we'll wrap up. Appreciate your time, Miriam, and your thoughts. And thanks everybody for listening to another episode of That Early Childhood Nerd.